Hey gang, it's Pastor Brandon from Journey. You wouldn't believe the technology problems we've had trying to shoot these videos on Revelation. I think this is like the 9th time today. So here we go. Revelation chapter 4 begins a new section of the book, a section dealing with the government. The church that was mentioned in the lampstands in chapters 2 and chapter 3 isn't mentioned again in the book of Revelation until the prologue at the very end. What chapter 4 through 20 deals with is Israel, the nations, not the church. And so God judges the world that sacrificed his son, precipitating those climactic events that usher in the end. So the first scene is heaven, where we're given a vision of the throne of God, a throne that's in absolute control throughout the entire period of judgment. 3 series of judgments follow: the seals, the trumpets, and the vials, as the world becomes increasingly wicked and godless, and lawlessness finally comes to a head. Then God steps in to make a full and final end to the problem of sin. So here we go, Revelation chapter 4. We're going to see John had a vision of things of the earth. Now he has a vision of things that he sees in heaven. And he mentions here in verse 2 that he saw a throne in heaven. He sees this throne about 12 or 17, 13, 14, whatever times in the next couple of verses and chapters. And he says, I saw someone sitting on it. The one sitting on the throne was as brilliant as gemstones, like jasper and carnelian, and a glow of emerald circled his throne like a rainbow. No doubt this is one of those things in Revelation that you read and you go, what? I want to talk about this for just a minute, and then we're going to move on. The gemstones, stones like jasper, they are hard, and it speaks to the hardness of God's laws because they are fixed and they are firm. You think about the laws that God put in place that we know through science, and the laws of gravity and the law of motion and all those things that are immutable. They're fixed. They're not changeable. And then he speaks about that Jesus, that he looks like carnelian, or God looks like carnelian. It's a red stone that speaks to his holiness, and it calls it speaks of the fire that is constantly burning on Israel's altar. And then he says there was a glow of emerald that circled him like a rainbow. When we think of a rainbow, we think of an arc. But this glow of emerald circled him, and it speaks of perfection. That circle is the sign of perfection. And emerald emphasizes the judgment that has to do with the earth. And then he moves on there in verse 4. He says, 24 thrones surrounded him, and 24 elders sat on them. They were clothed in white. And so these elders that sit on these thrones aren't there because they're there to bring judgment. They are there because it brings formality to the court proceedings. If you think of a court in the court of a king, like King Arthur or something, they always had the other people in the room that bring validity to the judgment that the king spoke. Verse 5, he says, from the throne came flashes of lightning and the rumbles of thunder. Listen, the judgment of God is not something to be taken lightly. It's something to be feared. And in front of them, he said there were 7 torches that were with burning flames. This is the sevenfold Spirit of God. The sevenfold Spirit of God we talked about in chapter 1 is in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. The Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. And so here's this sevenfold Spirit again. And he says in verse 6, in front of the throne was a shiny sea of glass sparkling like crystal. What does that mean? What does that have to do with anything? Well, if you think about the ocean, the sea, it's never the same. It's always changing. And he's speaking to the relentlessness of the wicked. But this sea is different. This sea is calm. It's still. It's like crystal. There is no motion to it. And it represents that it's no longer fluid. It's no longer capable of change. God's judgment will be transparent and it will be fixed. And it will cause the wicked to stop, to freeze in their tracks. And then he continues and he says, there around the throne, there were 4 living beings, each covered with eyes on the front and the back. And this, I think John is talking about the cherubim the tier of angels from which Lucifer, Satan, was cast out of, and he's going to have more to say on this in the future, so we're not going to cover it in detail here. But it is interesting to note that he says they were each covered with eyes on the front and back. And he continues in verse 7. It says their wings were covered with eyes. Why does he mention that? Because it implies that these angels, these cherubims, these living beings that are going to start executing judgments in short order, they have clear insight into the matters of heaven. They are supremely created beings. But look at what these supremely created beings are doing. They are worshiping. They keep on saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the one who was, the one who is, and the one who is still to come. Again, a theme from chapter 1. And then in verse 9, he says, whenever the living beings give glory and honor and thanks, then the 24 elders, they fall down, they worship, they lay their crowns before the throne, and they say, You are worthy, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and they exist because you created what you pleased. Look, God created us for a purpose. And part of that purpose is to bring him pleasure. No creature created, you or I, has the right to look at the Creator and deny his power. We exist only because of him. And we can't exist apart from a willingness to accept and submit to that power. I love how this sets the stage for the judgment that's coming, and it gives us a picture into what that courtroom looks like. We're going to jump into Revelation chapter 5 next. Choose you this day who you'll serve. Remember, I'm pulling for you because we're all in this together.